Hello. Have you ever had an experience with mystical, mythical, magical beings such as fairies, little people, gnomes, giants, unicorns, Pegasus? Uh, my name is Nancy Rebecca, and I have had some of those experiences, and so that's just some of the stories that I'm going to be sharing with you today. Why? Because on the earth, we are going through a consciousness awakening, and not only at the human level, but also at the animal level, the plant level, the trees level, the mountains, the whole earth, the whole universe is waking up. And the mystical, magical, mythical beings are waking up as well. My name is Nancy Rebecca. I work as a clairvoyant psychic and have for 25 years now. And one of the benefits that I have as a psychic and as a clairvoyant is I can see in the spiritual world at the same time that I can see into the physical world. And way back 25 years ago, it wasn't so fun. I was seeing a lot of things that no one had ever told me about, never thought was possible, and I most certainly never shared it with anybody else. But I think by this time, 25 years later, I'm just about as out of the closet with my abilities as I can be. And what I have been told by the spirit world and what I've been seeing is that the magical beings that exist in another dimension are beginning to reveal themselves again. So in this talk, I've written a lot about the blue light movement. I have a Facebook page called the Blue Light Movement, which any of you are welcome to look up and to become a member of. We have about 1,400 people on that page. And about once a month, I give a talk about anything having to do with the blue celestial beings of light. So I talk about a kind of a wide variety of things. So just last week, I talked about the magical mystical beings on the earth. And we all, I mean, let's admit it, we could really use a little magic in our life right now. I mean, there's so much turmoil and suffering that's going on the earth. There's just so much trouble, so much trauma that's going on that we can almost forget the magic. And I think that's why the magical, mystical beings are coming back in at this time to help us to remember the magic in life and help us to remember the beauty and the lightness, the light-mindedness and the light-heartedness. So when I was talking to the blue beings of light and they asked me to talk about that the mystical beings are beginning to awaken again, it's not that they were ever really asleep. They've always been there. But as this blue light is coming in, and remember this blue light, it's kind of a cobalt, kind of a lapis blue color that's really been coming from the kind of the universe coming down to the earth. Its main kind of job, its main kind of purpose has been to help dissolve any illusions, dissolve any false energies, false constructs that we as humans have created on the earth, false fears, false insecurities, false doubts and second guessing and not believing in ourselves, kind of all those kind of human kind of ego sorts of things. And it's enhancing truth. So it's dissolving illusion and it's enhancing truth. And as that is happening, those kind of veils, those walls between us and the spiritual world are starting to kind of collapse. They're getting thinner. So for those of you who may not have been very psychic, very intuitive, maybe didn't really even believe in any of this stuff, are suddenly finding yourself having experiences or maybe having the mystical beings come visit you in your dreams. I'm not a big dream person because my visual world is quite active during the day, so my spirit tends to give me more of a break at night. But I can tell you, even in these past few weeks, my dream world has become extremely active, beautiful, and fun. And boy, I really kind of needed that break as well. So let me just share with you just one of the first experiences that I had. So the very first experience I had, I was definitely a toddler. I was not able to communicate what I was experiencing. So I know I must have been pretty young. I remember I was sleeping in a kind of a single bed. I was in the bedroom. I remember there was a hardwood floor. And I remember being able to look out through the open door. I could see my mother sitting in a lit room, must have been like a living room, reading a book. So I was quite small, but I wasn't small enough to be in a crib anymore. So that gives you kind of an age, maybe around 2 or 3 years old. And I remember laying there and I was looking across the bedroom because something caught my eye and I saw this kind of activity off in the corner. And I remember as a child being quite curious about what is that that's moving in the corner of the room. I was far too young to feel frightened about it because kids have that really kind of playful, imaginative curiosity. I do remember turning my body, I'm on my belly and I'm kind of slipping down off the bed. And I remember my legs dangling there and I still couldn't touch the floor, and then kind of gave myself that little final push. And I can still remember the pads of my feet touching the hardwood floor. And then I kind of tottered on over to where I saw this movement happening. And I remember crouching down and looking quite closely. And this is what I saw. I saw about 30 little people, and I would say they were no more than maybe I don't even know if they were 6 inches in height. They were very, very tiny, but they looked just like you and me. They looked human, and they were wearing very human clothes. There were some that were adults, there were some that were children, and I remember they were pulling this cart that had kind of this double handle, and on this cart had items that they were kind of pulling along with them, and they were kind of traveling across my bedroom floor. So I remember my eyes being quite wide, and I remember them standing very still and staring back at me, and then suddenly there was this kind of flurry of activity and they kind of took off running. So my sense is now, looking back, because even though I'm 62 years old now, I can remember that as if it happened yesterday. But they started running, and my sense is I felt their fear, and I remember standing up and running back towards the bed, and I was far too small to climb back up on the bed. And then I remember turning and running into the living room and my mother picking me up, and I was crying and I was scared, but I never could kind of verbally explain to her what had happened. So that was my very first experience. But again, I remember as I got older, I never really told anybody that I believed in little people and that I saw little people. Excuse me, but I didn't have that experience again until I was much older. So this second experience I had was probably about 15 years ago. So I was definitely old enough to know better. And Yvonne and I had traveled to New Mexico. We had a very dear friend by the name of Leon Secatero, who was the spiritual leader, spiritual elder of the Canoncito tribe band of Native Americans. And we had met him in India, where he was giving a presentation on the Mayan calendar, and I was giving a talk about spiritualism in India. And so he had said, if you ever in the area, you are welcome to stay on my land and stay with me. So we actually drove down to New Mexico. And it happened to be during a time where their tribe, their band was traveling to their sacred land. So he had invited Yvonne and I to join him, which was quite unusual, as we were the first white people that had ever been invited to travel with them. So it was quite an honor. But his daughter spoke to us he asked his daughter to speak to us to kind of get us prepared to go on the sacred land, about what to wear, what not to wear, what to do, what the etiquette was. so that we could be honoring and respecting their culture. But one of the things that she shared with us was, like the jewelry or like my rings, or if I was wearing a necklace, she would say, any of your jewelry, you can't take it onto the land there because the little people love shiny things, and they'll take them. And so I thought that's quite curious, quite interesting, but I didn't really have anywhere to put my jewelry. We drove our car from Washington State to New Mexico. So I thought, well, I'll go ahead and get on the land and then I'll secure that. And there was a little part of me that didn't actually believe that that was going to happen, but it did. So this is what happened. Yvonne and I were in a tent, and it was a 3-man tent, but it was quite small actually. And the zipper of the doorway was, when I'm lying down, is ahead of, out this way behind me. And to the side, kind of on the inside of the tent, is like this little mesh little bag, a little zipper bag that's sewn into the tent, okay? So I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I forgot to take off my jewelry. So I took off my rings, I took off my bracelets, I took off my necklaces, my earrings, and I had a bandana. So I placed it in the bandana and I folded the bandana over and over again, quite small, quite tightly. Then I had a little cloth bag and I placed my jewelry inside the little cloth bag, that kind that has a little tie string and tied an extra knot in it. Then I put both of those in the mesh and I zipped it up. Now that mesh was probably about this close to the side of my head. So I thought, I am totally safe and secure inside the zipped up tent. Both Yvonne and I had not even gone to sleep yet, and we heard this flurry of activity around our tent. And we were not close to the rest of the group. We were kind of off by ourselves near our car. And we heard the pitter-patter of little feet, and it was not children. We heard this flurry of activity running around our tent very rapidly. And it was almost like the flurry kept getting faster and faster and faster and faster. And she and I, our eyes were open, really wide. And we're like, oh my God, what is that? It sounds like the little people. And we were quite frightened, actually. Now, I don't know what happened, but we both fell asleep. It was just like 1 minute we're kind of scared out of our minds, and the next minute we're waking up the next morning. When I woke up the next morning, I looked over and the little zipper mesh bag was zipped up, but there was nothing in it. The tie bag was gone, my bandana was gone, all my jewelry was gone, had completely disappeared. Now, if anybody came into our tent to steal it, they would have had to have unzipped 2 or 3 layers of zippers just to get inside of our tent. So I think I've proved my point that there was no way in without me knowing this. So all my jewelry was gone, and I said that it's just, how is that possible? The little people took my jewelry. So we went ahead and climbed out of the tent, and we started kind of walking around to see if we could see any signs of what was running around our tent just the night before. And would you know, we found every single piece of my jewelry scattered all around the outside of my tent. So I like to share that story because I actually had an eyewitness, where when I was a little toddler, I didn't have an eyewitness, but in that case, I had an eyewitness. So I had another experience. This next experience I was living in South Africa. Now remember, I'm clairvoyant, so I can see. And in this next experience, I was living on a piece of land for about a year at a place, it's a Zulu cultural homestead that's called Ikabazini. And I lived there in a Zulu hut with no running water and no electricity, and lived amongst some friends of ours that ran this cultural homestead that colleges, universities, elementary school students came to see, a traditional Zulu village. So anyway, that's where I was living. So I had gone for a walk that day, and I cut through the gardens on this land. And I looked off to the right, and to the right I saw some little gnomes. So these I could actually see with my clairvoyant sight. Now they were a little bit bigger, maybe about 2 feet high. And they looked just like little gnomes with the little pointed hats and the little leather shoes and the little clothes with the big round belly. You know, like you could have picked them up. They might have weighed about, I don't know, 20 pounds. So, I mean, they were quite solid little beings. But they were sitting there, you know, kind of like with their hands kind of resting, chin resting on their hands, and they had the big lip out just like that. So first of all, I'm like, I can't believe I'm seeing this. And then I said, you look really troubled. What are you so troubled about? And he said, I'm bored. And I said, you're bored? And he goes, yeah, we don't have anything to do. And we like to keep busy and we don't have anything to do. And I'm like, well, what do you like to do? And he said, well, we like to work in the garden. I mean, we kind of had this conversation. So I left the gardens in search of the owner of the land. When I found him, I shared the story with him. He was very quiet. He didn't say a word to me. He didn't even kind of roll his eyes. He didn't even respond. He just said, okay. And then he turned around and walked off. I don't think he quite knew what to do with me and this story that I just shared with him. So the bottom line is I didn't share it with anybody else because I didn't, you know, I'm sure he thought I was kind of a little bit cuckoo. So the bottom line was kind of forgot about it. I didn't even go back there again. I didn't even explore it. But 2 weeks later, I was going on a walk through the property and suddenly I saw these streaks of light going everywhere. And these streaks were just like firecrackers of light shooting everywhere in a straight line. I stood there for a minute and I looked this way and I looked this way and I thought, what is all this light? It was broad daylight. It was midday. And then suddenly I had the thought, what is happening? And suddenly the same little man that I talked to before stopped suddenly. The light stopped and then I saw him. And he was breathing quite hard. And he said, I don't have time to talk. I'm far too busy to talk. I'm busy, busy, busy. And I'm like, but wait a minute. What are you so busy about? And he says, I just have a lot to do. I don't have time to talk. I have to get going. And that streak of light took off and he took off again. So this time I kind of trudged my way up to find the owner of the property again. And I said, I just have to share with you. It happened to me again. And so I shared with him what I witnessed, and he got this little half smile, little corner smile, little twinkle in his eye, very quiet, just nodding as I was talking. And I said, what are you smiling about? And he goes, well, after you shared that with me the last time, I wrote a list of things down. And on the list, I was saying, let the birds have some of the peaches off of this branch, but leave the rest of the peaches on the peach tree for human consumption. At the end of this row, you can leave the 2 cabbages on either end for the insects, but leave the center row of cabbages for human consumption. I've just planted these new seeds. Can you make sure that these seeds are able to hold the water because we're having a bit of a drought and I need to make sure those seeds could sprout. So he gave them this big list of what to do in the garden. So you can imagine he was very pleased to know that they were no longer bored, they were very happy and very responsive, and that unbeknownst to either myself or him, I was able to verify the experience that this was real. I've had a lot of experiences like this because I'm able to see the mystical world. I have seen giants. In Hawaii, I saw giants. I saw the Menehune in Hawaii, the little people in Hawaii. I was swimming in Kealakekua Bay in the big island of Hawaii, and I ran into thousands of mermaids. And I've had people around who've been able to verify these experiences. When I've been able to describe these mystical, magical beings, when I had no idea of their existence, to have people be able to say, yes, We know these giants. They are called blah, blah, blah. I can't remember the name that they called the giants. I've traveled in Ireland where I've been able to identify beings of light that have really made up hundreds and thousands of years of folklore and mystical stories. So we know them as fairy tales and folklore, but in the other dimensions that they exist in, they are very, very, very real. So when I asked the blue beings of light and I asked some of the mystical beings, and I did invite the unicorns in, I did invite the earthly angels in, I did invite some fairies in, I invited Ganesh, who is half elephant and half human. So all of these beings I kind of invited in, and I encourage you to kind of go into meditation and do the same thing. You can kind of invite them in and feel into their essence. What they described to me was that the light, the dimension that they come from, looks very much like a very rainbow light, just like a rainbow has those multiple colors, but they have sparkles to them, like these golden kind of silver, kind of LED, bright, bright light sparkles. And they said that right now they're coming to the earth to visit you, to visit me, to visit others, because we are so serious on the earth right now, and we have very real, serious problems. But if we can't remember the magic, if we can't remember to remain delighted, to remain curious, to remain open and optimistic that there is more to the world than just at our third dimension, that the stress levels, the anxiety, the panic, the depression is just going to burden us and overtake us. So their message to us right now that I'm sharing with you is that they're asking you to just take a moment to let go of all this seriousness, because seriousness is an energy. And that when we're a child, we remember how to be playful and imaginative. But as we get to be around the age of kind of 9, 10, and 11, that kind of heavier, kind of thicker veil comes through, and we start to kind of forget. I have a grandson that's getting older, and he said, I don't want to grow up. I don't want to have all the serious responsibilities of being an adult. And so I'm 62 years old, and I can tell you I'm ready to re-embrace the sparkles, to re-embrace the unicorns, to re-embrace Pegasus, to re-embrace the phoenix. Remember the bird that rises up out of the ashes. And so the mystical, magical beings, as the blue light comes through, it's helping us to dissolve those illusions, those falsehoods that have been telling us that these magical beings are not real, that magic is not real. Remember, in the Harry Potter movie, you have the Muggles. How does it benefit you to not believe? How did it benefit the Muggles? It only benefited the Muggles by remaining in fear and staying very stuck and very serious. And then you have Harry Potter, who were the wizards who had their magic wands. They knew that magic in the world existed, so they were able to, remember Harry Potter could call in that, I can't remember the being that was the white horse, I think it had wings, but he could call in when he needed its help, when he needed that spiritual support of that type of magic. So the more you kind of open and just kind of play, toy with, imagine that you have those types of mystical, magical beings, the fairies around to help kind of love and support and bring the magic to your life, the more you can kind of call in and say, things are getting really serious around here. I need some help remembering the magic. Remember Peter Pan and Wendy? Remember, she was the oldest child. She had younger siblings. And remember Never Never Land, where Peter Pan wanted to take her to help her remember the magic, that she was getting older and she was starting to forget to be playful and imaginative. And remember, he was an adult young man who kept pretending to be a little boy because he never wanted to grow up. You and I can be adults. We can do the adulting, we can be mature, and we can still remember what it's like to have fun, to remember the magic, to at least bring in the sparkles and the rainbows in our life. So, what you can do if you have a piece of land, you can create like a little pool of water. The little beings, there's a lot of little beings around. So you can invite them into your yard. You can put out things like nuts and fruits. They love shiny things. So you can leave out like dimes, nickels, and quarters. You can build like little houses. You can put little plants out there. You can leave them little flowers. If you're really creative, you can sew them clothes. I imagine that they would love those sorts of things. But even if you don't have a piece of land, if you live in an apartment, you can get like a little bowl of soil and create a little person environment that you can leave little offerings for them as well. So they love anything where you will create kind of an inviting area that you welcome them in. And the more you add this kind of rainbow sparkles to your own aura, you create that large ball of just that rainbow sparkly energy to infuse your field. They're going to look and say, that human likes little people. That human remembers what it's like to be magical. And you will draw to you more of these magical experiences. So remember, they've always been awakened. We are the ones who have forgotten their existence, and the burdens of the world have kind of filled up our aura, and so they're not able to get very close to us. So as we remember the magic, we get kind of lighthearted again. They'll just come right on in, and don't be surprised to have all sorts of experiences. And go online and look up mythical beings, beings of folklore. Depending on where you live in the world, you're going to have different experiences. So I just leave you with one little story just before I wrap up. I had traveled to Singapore to visit my sister, and she wanted to take me to one of her favorite places in Indonesia. And it was one of those places that had the long docks with the thatch hut buildings on the dock. So when you look through the cracks in the floor, you could see the water underneath. And I had just arrived there, so I had gone into my room, my hut, to meditate. And I heard the pitter-patter of little feet. So this was probably about maybe 8 years ago. And so I kind of opened my eyes and I turned around and I looked behind me, and there was about 200 little people in my room. I know this sounds crazy. However, I said hello, and they said hello back. And I said, nice to meet you. And they said, nice to meet you. And then they said, we just want to tell you we knew you were coming and we were so excited to meet you. And so that really kind of threw me, because it was like, how did they know I was coming? And then I said, is there something that you need from me? And they said, no, not at all. We know you're here for your vacation, but we just wanted to meet you in person and just welcome you to our island. So they left. I shared this with my sister, who's a little bit more on the skeptical side than I am. But I went and I searched out the manager of the resort. I asked the manager, and the manager's eyes got about this big, and he stepped back about 5 feet, and then he came back and he goes, who are you? And I said, well, I'm a clairvoyant. I can see into the spirit world, and I could see these little people. And so he starts whispering, and he takes me off to the side, and he said, please don't say this out loud, and please don't say this to anybody else. He said, because all of our staff lives on the island in huts, and they go there at night, and they come out on the dock to the huts, to the kitchen during the day to work with the guest. And he said, for several nights, I'd see them on the deck sleeping at night, and at 6 o'clock in the morning, they'd go back to their hut. So when I asked them why all the staff was sleeping on the deck, they said because the little people were scaring them and they kept coming to their rooms. So from the mainland, they had to bring a consultant in to promise the staff that little people don't exist. They had to bring in someone to assure the staff that little people don't exist. So now you've got this woman from America who shows up, who said the little people just came to visit her in the room. So he was like, if you tell the staff that you saw little people, they are all going to be on boats, and we will have no staff left. They will all quit. And so I had to promise him that I wouldn't share that story with them. But I share it with you because little people are real. Mystical beings are real. So let yourself open your mind, open your heart, open your spirit to having your own experiences. And let the magic begin. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning into this video this week. We have lots more stories where this came from. So if you like these stories and like this video, please go ahead and click the subscribe button so that you get notified each week when I release a new one. All right, take care. Bye-bye.